was reorganizing Grandma's recipe box when my phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. A text from my brother. Hey, just so you know, Lena and I are moving to Costa Rica next month. Already wired the money from the estate account. Don't worry, we'll send postcards. I read it twice. Then a third time. And then I laughed. Not a funny laugh. The kind that comes out when your body doesn't know what else to do with the information it just received. I set my phone face down on the counter, picked up my grandmother's handwritten card for her apple butter recipe, and finished what I was doing. Because that's the thing about working in estate law for 6 years. You get very good at not reacting until you've thought everything through. And I had already thought this through. 3 weeks ago, actually, my grandmother Evelyn turned 81 last spring. She still gardens. She still makes her own bread on Sunday mornings. And she still keeps a paper calendar on the refrigerator because she doesn't trust phones to remember important things. She is, without question, the most quietly capable person I have ever known. When my grandfather passed away 11 years ago, he left behind a modest but carefully managed estate, the house in Millhaven, a rental property 2 blocks away, and a trust account with just over $310,000 in it. The trust was set up to cover my grandmother's living expenses, medical care, and eventually to be split between her children when she passed. Her children, my father and my uncle Garrett. My father died 8 years ago, which meant his share would pass to his children, which meant me and my brother, Callum. I'm the younger one. I'm 31. I work as a paralegal at an estate law firm. Not glamorous, but I know how documents work. I know what signatures mean, and I know what happens when people start treating trust accounts like personal ATMs. Callum is 36. He's charming, chronically between jobs, and married to a woman named Lena who has, in the 4 years since they got together, quietly convinced him that most of his family's problems are caused by me. For a long time, I told myself that wasn't fair, that I was being paranoid, that Callum loved me. I stopped telling myself that about 14 months ago, when I found out they'd been taking money from my grandmother's account without her full understanding of what she was agreeing to. It started small. That's always how it starts. My grandmother mentioned, offhand, that Callum had helped her sort out some paperwork over the summer. She seemed pleased about it. She said it was nice to have someone handle things so she didn't have to worry. I smiled and said that was sweet of him. Then I went home and I worried. I'm not proud of what I did next, but I'm not ashamed of it either. I asked my grandmother, gently, over several conversations, whether she'd signed anything recently. She mentioned a reallocation form. She mentioned that Callum had explained it was just to make things more flexible. She mentioned that Lena had been very helpful. I pulled the trust documents. I have a copy because my grandfather named me as a secondary trustee, a fact that Callum either forgot or decided didn't matter. The reallocation form was real, and it had redirected a significant portion of the trust's discretionary disbursements to an account in Callum's name, framed as a caregiver compensation arrangement. My grandmother was not aware that this meant Callum could access funds at will. She thought she was paying him back for the groceries he bought her in June. The groceries cost $94. In the 8 months since the form was signed, $47,000 had been moved out of the trust. I sat in my car in the parking garage outside my office for a long time after I figured that out. Long enough that the fluorescent lights flickered twice, and a coworker knocked on my window to ask if I was okay. I said I was fine. I was not fine. But I was already thinking, here's what most people don't understand about situations like this. The worst thing you can do is confront someone before you've protected everything you can protect. If I had called Callum that night, which every part of me wanted to do, he would have known I was onto him. He might have accelerated whatever plan he had. He might have moved faster, taken more, made it harder to untangle. So I didn't call. I made an appointment with my firm's senior attorney, a woman named Hartley who has the energy of someone who has seen every version of human terrible behavior and is no longer surprised by any of it. I explained the situation without using my brother's name at first. She asked 3 questions, nodded once, and said, "You need to reinstate primary trustee authority and freeze discretionary disbursements before you do anything else." That process took 6 weeks. 6 weeks of paperwork, of acting normal at Sunday dinners, of listening to Callum talk about how Costa Rica had the best quality of life in the Western Hemisphere, of nodding when Lena showed me real estate listings on her phone. 6 weeks of knowing and saying nothing. My grandmother knew by week 3. I had to tell her. She had to consent to the trustee changes. She sat at her kitchen table with both hands wrapped around her coffee mug and listened to everything I said without interrupting. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, I wondered why he needed to come over so often. That was the hardest moment. Not the paperwork, not the legal process, not even the look on her face. It was the gentleness of that sentence. The way she protected him even in the moment of realizing what he'd done. We updated everything. We moved the liquid assets into a new account under the reinstated trust with new access controls. The rental property income was rerouted. Callum's caregiver compensation arrangement was formally terminated, though we did not notify him of this directly. As far as his online banking showed, the account still existed. It had simply stopped receiving funds. We let him think everything was fine, and then we waited. The waiting was genuinely the hardest part. I want to be honest about that. There's a version of this story where I'm some sort of calm, strategic mastermind who felt nothing while all of this was happening. That's not true. I cried in my car more times than I can count. I lay awake at 2 in the morning running through every what if. I second-guessed myself constantly. Was I overreacting? Was there some explanation I hadn't considered? Was I the one destroying the family? My best friend, who has known me since college, sat with me one night while I spiraled through all of it. And she said something I keep coming back to. She said, you didn't create this situation. You just refused to pretend it wasn't happening. That helped, not immediately, but eventually. Meanwhile, Callum and Lena continued planning their move as though it were the most natural thing in the world. They gave notice on their apartment. They posted about Costa Rica on Instagram. They sold most of their furniture. They had a going-away party that I did not attend, because I had a prior commitment that I invented. I knew they were planning to make one large final transfer before they left. I knew because Lena had mentioned at one of the last family dinners that they were going to settle everything with the estate before they went. She said it the way people say things when they think the other person doesn't understand what they're actually saying. I understood. What she didn't know was that there was nothing left to transfer. The account Callum had access to had been empty for 3 weeks. My grandmother's recipe box has tabs for every category: breads, preserves, soups, desserts, a tab in the back, in her handwriting, that just says miscellaneous, which contains clippings from magazines, and one recipe for something called a depression cake that has no eggs or butter because it was written during a time when those things were rationed. I think about that cake sometimes, about what it means to adapt, to make something work with what you have, even when what you have isn't much. I was reorganizing that box, actually reorganizing it not as a metaphor, when the text came in. Hey, just so you know, Lena and I are moving to Costa Rica next month. Already wired the money from the estate account. Don't worry, we'll send postcards. He thought he was being smug. He thought that text was his victory lap. He thought I would open it and feel that specific kind of helpless fury that comes with knowing someone has taken something from you and there's nothing you can do. He had no idea that I had been waiting for exactly this moment. I put my phone down and finished sorting the recipe cards. Then I made myself a cup of tea. Then I sat down at my grandmother's kitchen table and I called the attorney. She picked up on the second ring. He sent the text, I said. Good, she said. That's documented intent. Do you want me to make the call? I said yes. What happened next is something I only know secondhand because I wasn't there. But my grandmother's neighbor, a retired schoolteacher named Mrs. O'Coffer, who has lived next door for 22 years and notices everything, called to tell me what she saw from her front porch. Callum and Lena came back to Millhaven 4 days after the text. They had apparently tried to access the estate account from abroad and discovered the balance was not what they expected. They had apparently called the bank. The bank had apparently told them that the account access they believed they had was no longer valid. They had apparently not taken this well. They showed up at my grandmother's house at 11 in the morning on a Tuesday. Mrs. Carolette, Okafor said they were both talking loudly before they even got to the front door. She said my grandmother answered in her gardening apron and held the door open in that particular way she has. Not inviting them in, exactly. Just making space. I don't know everything that was said. My grandmother gave me the version she wanted to give me, which was brief and precise. She said Callum told her there had been a mistake with the account. She said she told him there hadn't been. She said Lena started to say something and my grandmother interrupted her, which is something my grandmother almost never does. She said, I think it's time you both went home. And they did. Because there was nothing else to do. The legal framework was airtight. The documentation was thorough. The funds were protected. The trust was intact. The postcards, as far as I know, never came. I want to tell you this got easier after that. In some ways it did. The acute anxiety, the constant low-grade dread of waiting for something to happen. That lifted. The financials were stabilized. My grandmother's care is now managed through a formal arrangement that doesn't involve any family member having unilateral access to anything. In other ways, it's still hard. Callum sent me 2 messages in the weeks after everything fell apart. The first one was angry. The second one was the kind of message people send when they want to seem like the reasonable one, measured, slightly wounded, implying that I had overreacted and damaged the family over what he called a financial misunderstanding. I didn't respond to either of them, not because I didn't have things to say. I had a great many things to say. I had things I'd been rehearsing for months, actually, arguments I could have made, questions I could have asked, the whole careful accounting of every moment where I'd given him the benefit of the doubt and he'd used that benefit to take something else. But I've learned something from working in estate law. I've seen what happens when families go to war over this stuff. I've seen the years it takes, the money it costs, the way people become defined by their grievances. I've watched people spend more fighting over something than the thing was ever worth. I didn't want that. I wanted my grandmother to feel safe. I wanted her remaining years to be calm and cared for and not shadowed by the fallout of what her son tried to do. I wanted the Sunday dinners to go back to being about her bread and her recipe box and not about money and who had access to what and who owed whom an apology. So I said nothing. I let the silence do what silence does. My grandmother turned 82 in April. We had a small party, just her closest friends, her neighbor, Mrs. Okafor, and me. I made the apple butter from the recipe card, the one I'd been holding when the text came in. It took most of the afternoon. It made the whole house smell like fall. She tasted it and said it wasn't quite right. The apples were a different variety than the ones from her old tree, but she smiled when she said it. Later, after the guests had gone, we sat on her back porch in the last of the evening light, and she was quiet for a while in the way she gets when she's thinking about something she's not sure she wants to say. Then she said, "I keep thinking about when he was little. He used to follow your father everywhere. He wanted to do everything your father did. I didn't say anything." "I don't know when that changed," she said. "I really don't." I reached over and put my hand over hers. She has gardener's hands, rough and capable and warm. She turned her palm up and held on. We stayed like that for a while, not talking while the light went gold and then went gray. I don't know how to wrap this up neatly because it doesn't wrap up neatly. My brother is, somewhere. Maybe still planning Costa Rica. Maybe not. My grandmother is here, in her house, with her garden and her recipe box and her paper calendar on the refrigerator. The trust is intact. The rental property generates income. Her medical care is covered. It's not a satisfying ending, exactly. There was no confrontation scene, no moment where I got to say all the things I'd rehearsed. There was just paperwork and patience, and the slow, quiet work of making sure someone I loved was not left unprotected. If there's a lesson in it, I think it's this. The loudest moves aren't always the most effective ones. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is handle everything before the other person realizes you've started. Sometimes protection looks less like a fight and more like a document signed on a Tuesday afternoon with no drama, no witnesses, no audience at all. My grandmother knew. That was enough. I still have the recipe card. I'm going to try the apple butter again in October, when the right apples are in season. I think I can get it closer. I think, with the right ingredients and enough patience, I can get it exactly right. I've thought a lot about what the word trust actually means. Not the legal document, the other kind. The kind to extend to someone because they're family, because you grew up in the same house, because you assume that shared history means shared values. I extended that to my brother for 31 years, and for most of those years, I think it was warranted. I don't think Callum was always the person he became, but somewhere along the way, he made a series of choices. Small ones at first, then larger ones, and each choice made the next one easier to justify. That's how it works. Not a sudden fall, a slow lean. What I've come to believe is that the consequences we experience aren't random. They're the accumulated weight of our own decisions finally catching up to us. Callum didn't lose access to that trust because I was vindictive or because the universe was keeping score. He lost it because he made choices that required a response, and I was paying enough attention to respond. The outcome was a direct result of the actions. It's almost mechanical when you look at it clearly. And I think that's the part that matters most. The looking clearly. For a long time, I didn't want to see what was happening because seeing it meant I had to do something about it. And doing something meant accepting that the family I thought I had wasn't quite real. That's a genuinely painful thing to reckon with. I don't want to minimize it. The grief of realizing someone you love has been taking advantage of someone you love even more. That's its own particular kind of loss. But I've learned that clarity, even when it hurts, is a form of respect. For yourself and for the people you're trying to protect. Pretending not to see something to keep the peace isn't kindness. It's avoidance dressed up as kindness. My grandmother deserved someone who would actually look, actually act, actually follow through. That's what I tried to be for her. Not perfectly. I second-guessed myself constantly, but consistently. The other thing I keep coming back to is patience. Not passive patience, where you just wait and hope things resolve themselves. Active patience. The kind where you do the quiet, unglamorous work. The paperwork, the attorney meetings, the weeks of saying nothing at Sunday dinners. Because you understand that the timing of an action matters as much as the action itself. Moving too fast would have cost us everything. Waiting until everything was in place was the only thing that worked. Evelyn is 82 now. She tends her garden, she makes bread on Sunday mornings. The trust is intact, her care is covered, and her home is hers. That's the whole point. That's what all of it was for. Not the confrontation, not the moment of Callum standing at an empty account. Those things are just what happened. The point was always her. If I could say one thing to anyone going through something similar, it would be this. Don't let the fear of conflict stop you from doing the thing that actually protects someone. Conflict avoidance feels like the safe choice until you realize what you've allowed to happen while you were busy keeping the peace. You can be gentle and still be firm. You can love someone and still refuse to let them cause harm. Those things are not opposites. I used to think they were.